and inauspicious activities. Similarly, within this material world, we will be inevitably face both pleasing and disgusting situations. If, however, we remain fixed in Krishna consciousness, we will not be disturbed by the inauspicious, nor will we become attached to the materially auspicious. In the course of his spiritual duties, a devotee sometimes finds himself chanting Hare Krishna in a beautiful country atmosphere. And sometimes he finds himself doing the same thing in a hellish city. In both cases, the devotee fixes his mind upon Lord Krishna and experiences transcendental bliss. Although the wind passes through the most dark and forbidden places, the wind is not frightened or disturbed. Similarly, a devotee of the Lord should never be fearful or anxious, even when in the most difficult situation. One who is attached to materially pleasing forms, tastes, smells, sounds, and touches will also be repelled by the opposite in each category. Thus, finding himself surrounded by innumerable good and bad things, the materialist is constantly disturbed. When the wind blows in many directions at once, the atmosphere becomes agitated. Similarly, if the wind is constantly attracted and repelled by material objects, there will be such a mental disturbance that it will be impossible to think of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should learn from the blowing wind the art of moving through the material world without attachment. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurubhai Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Shrimate Romapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirveshesha Shunyavadi Pashatyade Shatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So the Avadhuta Brahmana, he is explaining his process and experience to Maharaj Jadu. And he is allowing to know, in other words, he's sharing how he was able to learn and learn about transcendence from nature. So he's explaining right now this session is about how all these different gurus that were part of the environment, nature, all the different elements, people, animals, all became sources of enlightenment and guidance for this Avadhuta Brahmana. In other words, he's telling Maharaj Jadu how he got to the position of being a perfect transcendental person. So in this case, this verse is he's learning from the wind, Vayu Guru. And he can see that the wind is moving everywhere, and it's touching everything, but the wind remains unattached. The nature of the wind doesn't change. So one of the principles that the Avadhuta Brahmana is highlighting here is that the spiritual life is not escaping the world. It's moving through the world without losing one's inner connection to Krishna. Basically, it's a principle. And it's the same principle that Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita, throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, that one's mind have to be fixed in Krishna. And that's the position of perfect transcendence. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that there is two different types of transcendentalists. And this is something very important to understand, because we're listening to these principles that they're principles that are applied in perfection by highly elevated personalities, transcendentalists. But the same principles will be applied by neophyte transcendentalists, or by persons who are endeavoring in climbing what is called the yoga ladder. This is a principle that is taught in the Bhagavad Gita. The same principle will apply, the principle of trying to fix one mind in Krishna. The mind will be anchored in thoughts of Krishna. And that is the position, again, of perfection. That is what is being highlighted here. That even though we can move through the world, even as a perfect transcendentalist or a neophyte transcendentalist, and still the same principle applies. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, that as you perform your duties, Krishna, Arjuna, you always think of me. How's that verse goes? Mama, Jusman, like even when you fighting, Jusman, how's it go? Well, yeah, anyway, you remember the verse. It's in the 8th chapter that Krishna tells Arjuna, therefore, Arjuna, just always think of me. Even while doing your duty of fighting, just think of me. And by doing that, you will come to me without doubt. So, it's a principle that is there. But Krishna makes clear that that principle applies differently to these two types of transcendentalists. This is described in the 6th chapter of the Gita. Right in the beginning, because remember, Arjuna was making a case to take the activities of a renouncing person to someone who renounced the world, renounce all work. And Krishna discouraged him because Krishna explains to him that, especially in this chapter, he makes it clear. It took time. It took 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita for Arjuna to finally understand this principle. To Krishna makes the point, and then move to the next session of the Bhagavad Gita that started to to reveal the most transcendental knowledge, or the king of all knowledge, the principles of bhakti. So it took Arjuna quite some time. I mean, he asked the question, he was explaining the principle in the second chapter, throughout the second chapter. He asked in the third chapter, I don't understand. You ask me to do this, but, at the same time you tell me, so please explain. Krishna goes on to explain, third and fourth chapter. Fifth chapter, he asks the same thing again in different words. Krishna goes on to explain. Sixth chapter, he's still more or less trying to understand that principle. So Krishna finally explains to him that, yes, you are a devotee, but one have to understand that these two levels of transcendentalists. So Krishna says, Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanan uchate yoga arudasya tasyaiva shama karana uchate. Shama karanan uchate. For one who is a beginner in the eightfold yoga system, yoga ruruksho. So this is when we study the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhakti Shastri, this is something that is very much point out, these two levels, yoga ruruksha and yoga ruda. Remember. So for one who is a beginner in the eightfold yoga system, yoga ruruksha, work is said to be the means. For one who has already obtained the stage of yoga, that's yoga ruda, cessation of material activity is said to be the means. It's a very important principle to understand, and Krishna makes that case back in the second chapter in a much more broad manner. He when he tells Arjuna that to take a position of renunciation when you are not ready, you not have the qualification for doing that, then you will find yourself doing something that is just a display. Doesn't have substance, and therefore it will create a big obstacle for you. Krishna's famous verse, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina, that if the translation is, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for the sense objects remains. And remember, when I studied Bhakti Shastri back in time, my teacher was Jadurani Prabhu. And she is a brilliant teacher. And remember, and also hearing from Burijan Prabhu, who is, the sort of the acharya of teaching Bhagavad Gita, Bhakti Shastri for ISKCON back in time. And remember the example of, you sitting in renunciation, Arjuna, how it will be, he's sitting, chanting Hare Krishna in the Himalayas, and then all of a sudden the mind pops a thought, that Duryodhana, that, horrible person, like that. So Or Burijan Prabhu used to say, you chanting Hare Krishna, all of a sudden, you start to think of enjoying pizza or ice cream or something like that. So, Krishna says to Arjuna that if you're not ready, even acting in a way that you're restricting your senses, your mind will be still attached to the objects. So then he says, Rasa Varjan Raso Pyasya Parandrishta Nivartante. But if one has a higher taste, then one will be in that fixed consciousness. So, what happens then if we don't have that higher taste, or that, no, let's put it the other way. What happens when our consciousness is not perfectly fixed in Krishna? In other words, we're still in the yoga ruruksha level. So that's the whole Bhagavad Gita, because Krishna is telling Arjuna, you're not ready, you're still in the yoga ruruksha. Therefore, working devotion is a principle for you. Is the path for you. And the sixth chapter is very relevant for us, for practitioners, for sadhakas, because it tells about the principles to deal with the mind. And the mind again becomes central in this whole principle of fixing your consciousness in Krishna. So Krishna tells Arjuna that as long as you have desires and attachments in this world, you're not ready for renunciation, for renouncing work. Let's not say renunciation, but for renouncing your duties, your work. You're not ready for that. Why? Because your mind is still vulnerable. Vulnerable to attachments, vulnerable to rejections. How you say attachments and what is the word for rejection? Aversions. So your mind is still vulnerable to those things, to good and bad, to auspicious and inauspicious. And right here is the same. The teachings of Vajraguru is that you can go through auspicious or inauspicious things, but your nature remains unchanged. So it's a similar thing with the mind. The mind will be vulnerable. So you're not ready. So therefore, working devotion is a means for you. And Krishna goes on to explain the principles of how, even in a position in which we're still vulnerable because of attachments and aversions, you can actually move. The word ruruksha means to climb. It literally means that, to climb. So once who wants to climb the yoga ladder, you want to move from point A to point B. Point A being, I'm vulnerable, I'm still invested in this material world, but I'm a transcendentalist. I have accepted the path of transcendence, the path of Krishna consciousness. So I'd like to move from this point to point B, which is perfectly situated in Krishna consciousness. When, my mind is perfectly absorbed in Krishna consciousness. The position that Krishna explains that is the highest, the bhakti yogi. And the quality of the bhakti yogi is not that he renounced world. It's not that he renounced the whole thing. The quality is madgatena taratmana, that internally he's fixed in Krishna. His mind is perfectly perfectly fixed in Krishna. Shraddhavan bhajate yomam. And therefore, his devotion, with great faith, he acts in loving devotion towards Krishna. That's point B. So to go, Krishna explains how you do to go to that, from point A to point B. And, there is lifestyles, things that are recommended by Krishna. Yesterday we heard Krishna Archana was explaining about that. Some of the things that are important to do to actually help climb the yoga ladder. So one have to properly regulate the activities of body and mind. And to be a yogi, you have to regulate eating, sleeping, working, and entertainment. Those 4 things. You cannot be a yogi if those things are not regulated. And you have to constantly bring the mind. This is a very, very important principle that Krishna tells Arjuna, that from wherever the mind wanders, due to his flickering, chanchala, unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. That principle, that's what we've been taught. Constantly, the mind goes this way, blows this way, then you bring it back. And Arjuna say this example, when the wind blows, this way and that way and that way, it causes great disturbance in the atmosphere. Arjuna tells Krishna, controlling the mind is more difficult than control the wind. Because the mind is like that, it's fully agitated. It's like a tornado going on in there, So Krishna gave that powerful sadhana instruction by vairagya, and what's the other one? The term, by proper engagement or work, and by renunciation, abhyasayena, abhyasa yoga, by abhyasa, which is sadhana, is basically proper actions, proper engagement. In yoga terms, abhyasa means determination, by proper focus on acting in certain way, and by renunciation. So gradually we can climb that. So there's those 2 principles that are there. So we're moving from that vulnerable position in which the senses are still powerful and the mind is still easily disturbed. That's something that in the beginnings of Krishna consciousness, we may find ourselves dealing with those things. There may be attractions, there may be aversions, there may be, how we react to praise, to criticism, how we feel, towards being comfortable and discomfortable. These things are reality in these initial stages. And therefore, we're given the principles of regulations. So we learn how to regulate these things and do it properly. There is not such a thing of inactivity. there is no withdrawal of anything, is regulated engagement. If we, in a immature way, withdraw, then it will you will find yourself in a problem again, because your mind is still not fully free from that. And that's the situation. So regulated engagements will include performing our duties, our devotional duties, discipline, advancing or strengthening the capacity of being disciplined, the practices of purification, and our regulated sadhana, our regulated spiritual practices. So this is the sadhana bhakti is designed for this yoga ruruksha stage, to be able to train the mind to be anchored in Krishna. And while doing that, you're learning the principles that are taught by Bhagyu Guru to be able to navigate the world. Although with auspicious, inauspicious, good and bad objects, and we can always remember that I should refrain, or I should regulate absorption on those things. I should train the mind by regulation to diminish the absorption in these type of things. So then, that naturally will lead to the position that this Avadhuta Brahmana is, the Yoga Rudra position, when you have already established yourself in yoga. Meaning, your mind is perfectly controlled, your senses are peaceful, the attractions and aversions are minimized to almost zero. Like that. So a person like that, in that level, you're not driven by impulses of the modes of nature. And that's where this analogy of the wind is perfectly applicable. It's perfectly applicable. In the case of the neophyte devotee, the analogy of the wind is like, what Arjuna brought is the uncontrolled, the mind, to control that wind, to control that mind, is very applicable, like, that the wind blowing all the things, the atmosphere becomes disturbed like that. And the principle of being perfectly anchored in Krishna consciousness is the solution. So, if you have the wind blowing very strongly, but you have something perfectly anchored, say when you have trees with very deep roots, even though there's very strong winds that can uproot big trees, but the ones who are have deep roots, they don't get easily uprooted. But the ones who have shallow roots, they blow in no time. So that's a principle that applies. So the wind we can say is a symbol of this example of the wind is a symbol of Yoga Rudra consciousness. And so the principle of the yogi that moves among the senses, the objects of the senses, and remain perfectly unattached. his consciousness remains unmoved. So just as the wind passes to fragrant gardens, to dark caves, to blazing forests, the nature doesn't become unchanged. So the Yoga Rudra practitioner remains like that, perfectly situated in Krishna consciousness. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 5th chapter that a person's in divine consciousness thing, I do nothing at all. While seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, he knows that only the senses are engaged in their objects. So a perfectly realized person understands that this is just the body, this is just the senses engaging with the objects of the senses. But it's not me, I'm transcendental to that. So it's a very important principle to understand, and how we apply these things. So, in conclusion, we can at least, I like to meditate on how I can take lessons from these things. So we have this stage 1, let's call it like that, the Yoga Ruruksha stage. We engage the world with discipline. We perform the duties. We regulate our senses. We practice devotion. The stage 2 is Yoga Rudra. The mind becomes peaceful. The world no longer agitates the consciousness. The yogi, or the bhakti yogi, the devotee, moves through life like the wind, free, unattached, and steady. So, in conclusion, devotional conclusion, that we may be, like Srivallabha Prabhu was in this beautiful farm in India, peaceful. Now you're in Chicago. So in the purport is described that devotee may be chanting Hare Krishna in a beautiful countryside or in a hellish city, but still you remain with the same principle. My mind have to be fixed in the activities of Krishna consciousness. So I'm going to stop here and just ask if you want to contribute with any thoughts or questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for the class, Prabhu. Just wish to know that you have spoken about the yoga ladder. As we all know that there are 4 types of yoga that has been described: Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. So when we speak about the yoga ladder, we understand we are speaking about the progressive nature of this different type of yoga. But at the same time, we also understand that Bhakti Yoga is independent of all this ladder process. Because Prabhupada has given us, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us a direct process of Bhakti Yoga. So no need to go through the steps of yoga ladder. So is this understanding is correct?
Yeah, I think, many things that we learn, this is my, limited realization. Many things that we learn or we receive from the teachings of the Vedas is principles that are applied for different types of people. And then those same principles, according to those different types of people, are adjusted to be relevant to the nature of those people, what is required for them to elevate. The whole principle is elevation of consciousness. So for someone who is a materially conditioned person, then that principle of elevation, of climbing, moving from point A to point B, is described as a yoga ladder. You first start with karma kanda, and then from karma kanda you start to climb the ladder to karma yoga, nishkam karma yoga, then jnana yoga, and like that. So you're going on ultimately until you reach bhakti yoga. So that applies. That's one of the yoga ladders that we learn in the Bhagavad Gita. Is described there. But in this case, also in the 6th chapter, is for the yogi. There's also a climbing that is happening too. There's also a ladder that is happening, and that's what is explained here in the 6th chapter. And in the case, as you say, of the Bhakti Yoga, we're giving a very wonderful opportunity by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, that we're given the highest thing right from the beginning. So that's where our Vaishnavacharyas, Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, break down Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya. There's also steps to follow and to go from, step 1 to Krishna Prema, like that. So even, within, the principle applies. It's a principle of climbing up, of elevation. And that's how I understand it. You want to add to that?
As you have said that this Bhakti Yoga, we are elevating ourselves slowly through 9 stages of Bhakti process. Shraddha, Sadhu Sang, Bhajan Kriya. But as far I understand that these are the steps for those who are into Bhakti Yoga. Means once we cross all this ladder and enter into Bhakti Yoga realm, and within Bhakti Yoga we are having these 9 stages. That is my understanding. Just wish to know that, is it right?
Yeah.
So then if that is right, then how again this karma kanda, karma yoga, we are not following any of this thing as such.
No.
We are not going to Jnana Yoga process, we are not practicing Ashtanga Yoga, we are directly practicing Bhakti Yoga.
Yeah.
So even in that stage, Yoga Ruruksha and Yoga Rudha, point A to point B, we are actually directly on Yoga Rudha Avastha, like this is the top of the yoga ladder. So aren't we missing something?
No,
because
I don't understand it like that. I understand that for us as Bhakti Yogis, or aspiring Bhakti Yogis, the same principles apply. The Yoga Ruruksha could be compared to our neophyte stages, Kanishta Adhikari. It could be compared to the stages of Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, and Artha Nivritti, that stage. And then also Nishta, in one sense. So we're in the process of fixing our mind. In the Nishta now becomes fixed. So the same principles apply. That's what I'm saying. The way I understand it is that Krishna is teaching Arjuna and teaching us principles. And these principles, because it's a principle, fundamental principles that apply both in the higher stages and the lower stages also. So it's a principle again of elevation. So for the Astangi yogi, same thing, yoga ruruksha, yoga rudha. Like, in the beginning, you have to practice, yamas and niyamas and then asan, so it's a gradual thing. For the karma yogi, it's similar. You have to sacrifice this, you have to do these sacrifices, you have to do things, you go to the heavenly planets, in the heavenly, by association you hear, there's a whole process of elevation.
So you meant to say that in every yoga stage, there is yoga ruruksha and yoga rudha also. Like
Yes.
let's say in karma yoga stage, there is a beginning and there is a topmost level within the karma yoga. So even in Jnana Yoga also, there is Yoga Ruruksha and Yoga Rudha for Jnana Yoga. For Ashtanga Yoga also, there is Yoga Ruruksha and Yoga Rudha. That is what you are trying to say?
That's what I understand. That's what I understand. As a principle. Now, Krishna explains that all of those, they need, in order to come to a Yoga Rudha, you have to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. So they have to lead to that. So therefore, Krishna is teaching us here karma yoga, but it's karma yoga devotional service. It's how to do our duties, our work for the pleasure of the Lord. So you all have to lead to Krishna consciousness. Krishna says that also in I think what is in the 3rd chapter, that all the path is leading to Him. Right?
We'll discuss more later.
Yeah, it's also my limited understanding, but these things can be really, really deep.
Can I just comment on this?
Yes, please.
So, what you're talking about, I'm not able to understand exactly. But what I understand is, when we talk about the levels, Karma Kanda, Karma Yoga, then Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, definitely they are levels. Because Krishna says, Bahunam Janmanamante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Durlabha. After practicing Jnana Yoga for many lifetimes, he may understand Krishna is the Supreme and he may go to Krishna. That is one understanding. Second is, direct elevator system is also there, wherein we can directly go to Krishna. And how that can happen? By association with a Bhakti Yogi, association with a devotee. 10:51-53 says that Bhavapa Vargo Bhamato Yatha Bhave Janasya Tarhi Achyuta Sat Samagama. It says that material life is stopped when you associate with a devotee. Now, talking about Yoga Ruruksha and Yoga Rudha, when that verse comes in, it is in the chapter 6, which is Dhyana Yoga, right? So it says that Arurukshur Munir Yogam Karma Karanam Uchyate. When one is at a neophyte stage, karma is said to be the means. When one is at an elevated stage, then cessation of karma is said to be the means. So, we see in the first 6 chapters, in the first 5 chapters especially, Krishna is urging Arjuna to work. He is not telling him to take karma sannyas. Because the problem is, we have karma yoga, then above that we have Jnana Yoga. The problem is, in Jnana Yoga, if we try to stop all work, then if the person is not totally purified, instead of falling back to Karma Yoga, he may fall into Vikarma. And therefore it is recommended that you practice, therefore 5th chapter and 3rd chapter. The difference is 4th we have transcendental knowledge. So when he is acting Karma Yoga, he is doing with that Jnana. That is what is action in Krishna consciousness. And when one becomes completely purified, then it is like Yastu Atmaratir Eva Syad Atma Triptasya Manava. He has nothing to do, he is totally purified. That is what is the stage of Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga, because in meditation, if some mundane thoughts are coming, then that is not proper. So for that you have to work. But when those are not coming, then you can just meditate and be like that. Although Krishna discourages it, it says that no one can stay nahi kashit shanam api jatadishtatya karma krit. He says that you cannot remain void from, you cannot remain vacant of desires, you need to do work. Now this is Dhyana Yoga stage wherein a person is totally fixed, for example. But then Bhakti Yoga, again we are doing some kind of karma, it also become highest because we are doing it for Krishna. In Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, the understanding is not there. The total understanding is not there that he is doing especially for Krishna. And he may be attached to doing work. Offering to Krishna is later. But in Bhakti Yoga, he is doing it out of love for Krishna. Therefore, you see 9.26 is Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. That is a pure devotional service verse, wherein it talks about offering with love. But the next verse, Yat Karoshi Yadashnashi, it is one level lower, because you are doing what you want. And then ultimately we can understand Bhakti Yoga as the topmost when we go from 12.8 to 12.12, if we see those verses. Mai eva mana adhatsva, fixing the mind on Krishna, that is today's verse also. That is the topmost. And then Krishna says, if you are not able to do that, okay, do karma for me. At least offer. And Acharyas say that you should do some gardening and things like that. Even if you are not able to do that, just do some activity and offer it. Or just offer it to someone else. Also, there is no problem in that. So, I guess there is no confusion in that. Haribol.
Krishna, you have something to add? Okay. So, thank you so much, Prabhu. It's always wonderful to discuss the subject matters of the Bhagavatam among devotees. Thank you. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.